Arrakis is a death trap.
Kill them. This is an extermination. They're picking my family off one by one.
Let's fight like demons.
An animal caught in a trap will gnaw off its own leg to escape. What will you do?
Dune is a foundational work in science fiction, and easily one of my favorite properties of all time. The first book is often seen as the most accessible, pulling you into a world that's completely alien, yet incredibly grounded. As the series goes on, it doubles down on the esoteric, exploring stranger ideas and more challenging themes. It was the first novel that made me realize that science fiction wasn't just popcorn entertainment. It could have real literary weight. Because Dune isn't just a good story. It's a philosophical battleground. And that's what I'm here to talk about. The philosophies that form the foundation of Dune, and how the author, Frank Herbert, uses characters and factions to embody and exaggerate those ideas. From groups like the Bene Gesserit and the Landsrat to individuals like Paul and Baron Harkonnen, each figure in Dune carries a distinct worldview. The series pits these ideologies against one another to see which ones survive pressure and which ones collapse. So while we read Dune for the action, what's really being tested are the ideas that each character represents. Virtue, profit, survival at any cost, progress. These concepts motivate nearly everyone in the story. And even though we still have clear protagonists and antagonists, Herbert isn't elevating one belief system above the others. He's showing the strengths and consequences of each philosophy when taken to its extreme. Many of his characters are almost exaggerated case studies, tools for exploring an idea. The first novel is overflowing with competing worldviews, and it sets the philosophical foundation for the entire series. This video would be hours long if I tried to cover them all. That's how richly written these books are. So, to keep things focused, we're sticking to a few of the main characters from Book 1, the ones who represent entire factions in Herbert's universe. But before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe. It is the only way the YouTube algorithm will ever actually notice me. And with that, let's dive into the deserts of Dune on this episode of Philosophic. He's the walking embodiment of Stoicism, the ancient Greek philosophy centered on virtue, duty, and emotional discipline, the Duke Leto Atreides. Despite its origin in Greek mythology, the Atreides name doesn't exactly point to the Stoic connection. The surname Atreides refers back to the Greek king Atreus and his descendants, figures like Agamemnon and Menelaus, kings defined by ancient curses, cruelty, and tragedy. So why would I try to claim Leto as the representative of Stoic ideals? At its core, Stoicism teaches that happiness comes from living a life of virtue and reason, focusing on what's within our control and accepting what isn't. It emphasizes emotional resilience and self-discipline, distinguishing between our own actions and the external events that we can't change. Its key virtues are wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. A perfect example is Leto's view of leadership in his quote, "A great man doesn't seek to lead. He's called to it, and he answers." That's a textbook Stoic response. And Leto's first major act on screen is exactly that. He accepts the Emperor's obvious trap, moving his family to Arrakis without anger or protest, because rejecting it would violate his duty, and duty is the one thing that he can control. Leto even says in the movie,
"We are House Atreides. There is no call we do not answer. There is no faith that we betray. The Emperor asks us to bring peace to Arrakis. House Atreides accepts!
Instead of resisting or running away, Leto immediately starts planning the most honorable path forward for his house. But here's the tragedy. Stoicism, admirable as it is, blinds Leto to the brutal realpolitik of the Imperium. His virtue becomes a vulnerability. And in this, Herbert may be asking a question. Does a purely stoic leader survive in an unstoic world? Leto's tragedy shows the limitations of inflexible virtue. Stoicism gives him dignity, but it also gets him killed. This character is, in almost every way, Leto's ideological inverse. A man driven by greed and lust, the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. The Baron represents unchecked hedonism, the belief that pleasure is the ultimate goal in life, in whatever form that pleasure takes. Herbert makes this clear from the moment we meet him. He's described as grossly and immensely fat, his enormous body held aloft by suspensors, so he doesn't collapse under his own weight. His physical excess mirrors his moral excess. And unlike Leto, who restrains himself, the Baron indulges in every desire, especially the darkest ones. He's sadistic, taking pleasure in inflicting pain, whether it's on slaves in the fighting pits of Giedi Prime or on his political enemies. Take this passage where the Baron's servant, Piter, describes torturing the captured Duke. Hot tallow on the back, perhaps. It's especially effective when the subject doesn't know where the tallow will fall next. A sort of beauty in the pattern of pus-white blisters on the naked skin, eh, Baron? Exquisite, the Baron said. This is hedonism without limits, pleasure pursued for its own sake, regardless of the cost to others. Politically, the Baron is driven by the same hunger. He hoards wealth, bribes and blackmails anyone who stands in his way, and dreams openly of taking the imperial throne. His subordinates are tools to him, useful only until they aren't. Deals with him are temporary at best, even if you're the Emperor himself.
The Emperor helped me destroy their traitors. He lent his own army to the cause, a serious crime. If it came to light, the great houses would rise against him. Then, who will sit on the throne? Fade Rotha, Harkonnen.
And layered over all of this is his personal vendetta against House Atreides. There are hints of ancient grudges in the book, referencing back to the Battle of Corin, but even on a purely philosophical level, this hatred makes sense. Hedonism and Stoicism are naturally incompatible. Stoicism values discipline, virtue, and self-control. Hedonism values indulgence, pleasure, and excess. When these two houses clash, it isn't just a political conflict. It's a battle between two incompatible visions of what a good life even is. And the outcomes reflect this. The Atreides fall because Leto's virtue blinds him to deception. The Baron wins because his greed and ruthlessness give him an early advantage. But that victory is short-lived. Hedonism always wants more, and the Baron's appetite for pleasure, for power, for control ultimately destroys him. When Paul and the Fremen rise against his tyranny, the Baron learns a truth of Herbert's universe. Pleasure without restraint collapses under its own weight. He's the mastermind behind the scenes, the man who set the entire conflict of Dune in motion, the one who forced House Atreides onto Arrakis and plotted for the Atreides and Harkonnen to destroy each other for his benefit. Shaddam IV, the Padishah Emperor. Shaddam is decadent, paranoid, and obsessed with preserving the status quo. His only real goal is maintaining absolute power, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to keep his throne. A simple line from the book captures his mindset. As a servant of the Imperium, you will bow at my feet. Shaddam's worldview aligns mostly with Machiavellian political realism, a form of consequentialism for rulers where morality is irrelevant, and the only question that matters is, does this action help me to stay in power? Cruelty, murder, manipulation, and the exploitation of your subjects are all on the table for this purpose. The philosophy boils down to one main idea, that the ends justify the means. And for Shaddam, the end is always self-preservation. His most obvious example of this is the order that starts the entire story, conspiring with House Harkonnen to destroy the Atreides. Leto hadn't committed crimes or broken the convention, he was simply becoming too popular. That alone made him a threat, so Shaddam eliminates him. This is a classic Machiavelli play. Remove the rival before he becomes strong enough to challenge you. But Shaddam's real power comes from the military machine of the Kreno dynasty. Machiavelli argues that a strong military is crucial for a state's survival and for a ruler's power, with disciplined forces loyal only to their leader, and that the military should be in a constant state of readiness, even in peacetime, with never-ending training and discipline. A quote from Machiavelli's seminal work, The Prince, captures this idea. A prince must not have any other objective, nor any other thought, but war, its institutions, and its discipline, because that is the only art befitting one who commands. Shaddam follows this prescription to the letter. The Sardaukar, his terrifying shock troops, are his instrument of domination. Their fearsome reputation keeps the great houses obedient. And to create the Sardaukar in the first place, the Emperor basically damns the entire population of the planet Seleucia Secundus to brutal conditions, resulting in millions of deaths, just to forge his elite troops. But the irony is that the Sardaukar have been living on their reputation for generations. No army in recent memory has been a real challenge for them. Machiavelli warns that a ruler who neglects the true realities of war will fall, and that's exactly what happens to Shaddam. He never expects the Fremen, warriors hardened by the brutal conditions of Arrakis, to rise up under Paul Atreides and defeat his prized army. In the end, despite everything he does to cling to power, Shaddam is overthrown by the very house he tried to destroy. His downfall proves one of Machiavelli's most famous lessons. The thing most likely to bring about a ruler's downfall is his neglect of the art of war. The thing most likely to win him power is becoming an expert in it. Shaddam tried to preserve power through fear alone, and he lost it to someone who understood war better than he did. But not every power in Dune comes from politics. Some come from belief. Unlike Leto, the Baron, or Shaddam, Stilgar of Siege Tabor doesn't chase political influence. His worldview is grounded in something far older and more human. Theism, faith, a belief in divine purpose and a higher moral order. A theist believes in the existence of one or many gods, whether or not that belief comes with a structured religion. Their philosophy is shaped by the edicts of divine authority. Stilgar, a Fremen Naib, represents the spiritual outlook of the Fremen, a culture shaped by religion, prophecy, and a harsh environment that demands both humility and reverence. From the moment that Stilgar appears in the story, everything he does is filtered through duty, tradition, and a belief in a destiny larger than himself. His authority as a leader doesn't come from manipulation or fear, but from his alignment with Fremen law and the respect of his people. And unlike the Baron or the Emperor, Stilgar's worldview isn't self-serving. It's community-centered. To the Fremen, survival itself is sacred. Their rituals like the water sharing, the spice orgy, and their careful stewardship of the desert all stem from a religious interpretation of Arrakis. And Stilgar embodies this from the very first time that Paul meets him.
Won't you stay? We would honor you.
Honor requires that I be elsewhere. She. I don't like him.
Stilgar's worldview is shaped by a deep belief that the universe has meaning, and that meaning is revealed through prophecy and tradition. Throughout the story, he becomes increasingly convinced that Paul fulfills the signs that he's been raised to recognize. He transitions from a capable, independent leader into a fervent believer. And this is where Herbert's commentary on theism gets interesting. Faith gives the Fremen unity, purpose, and the strength to endure a hostile world, but it also makes them vulnerable to being led into a holy war. Herbert shows both sides of religious conviction, its power to inspire survival, and its danger when fused with political ambition. At a certain point, it even gets out of Paul's control. No matter what he does, Stilgar and the Fremen will carry out their jihad in his name. Stilgar is loyal, honorable, self-sacrificing, and devoted to his tribe, but his faith also blinds him to the consequences of elevating Paul as a messianic figure. By the end of the first book, Stilgar has essentially surrendered his own authority in favor of Paul's divine narrative. In that instant, Paul saw how Stilgar had been transformed from the Fremen Naib to a creature of the Lisan al-Gaib. Paul felt the ghost wind of the jihad in it. "I have seen a friend become a worshipper," he thought. Herbert may be using this quote to ask the question, what happens when sincere faith is harnessed by someone with immense power? Stilgar shows the beauty and the danger of theism. His belief strengthens his people and helps Paul rise, but it also becomes one of the fuels of the coming jihad. In Herbert's world, theism is neither good or bad. It's powerful. It shapes civilizations. And through Stilgar, we see how faith can both preserve a culture and become the spark that transforms the entire galaxy. And this brings us to the final and arguably most fascinating group in the series, the Bene Gesserit, epitomized by Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohayim. The Bene Gesserit are difficult to pin down to a single philosophical school because they draw from several traditions, mysticism and eugenics among others. But the clearest lens to view them through is Nietzschean philosophy, whose core ideas include the will to power, the fundamental drive to grow, create, and overcome, the death of God, the decline of religious faith and its impact on morality, and the Übermensch, an individual who transcends humanity. The Bene Gesserit are driven by a fear of tyrannical rulers, and aim to take control of humanity's future themselves. They start by placing Bene Gesserit sisters in every great house, acting as political advisors, through which they can control and guide the galaxy. But behind the scenes, they orchestrate a 10,000-year breeding program to create a superhuman, someone with unmatched physical and mental abilities, who can access both their female and male ancestral memories and see all possible futures. This being they refer to as the Kwisatz Haderach, who would become an unchallengeable ruler, basically the tyrant they were afraid of in the first place. But here's the rub. They want to create him, and then control him. This Kwisatz Haderach is not what Nietzsche is picturing in his ideals, and definitely is not his Übermensch. If anyone in the story represents Nietzsche's concept of the Superman, it's the Bene Gesserit sisters. Nietzsche's Übermensch is an individual who transcends ordinary human limitations, creates her own values, and gains mastery over herself, without relying on gods or rulers. More importantly, it's an ideal, something to strive towards, not necessarily a final stage of evolution. In many ways, the Bene Gesserit fit this mold. They do overcome normal human limitations through training and discipline, but this isn't where their real power comes from. Many of the other factions in the Dune universe physically surpass baseline humans. But it's the Bene Gesserit's concept of political independence, of not bowing to any ruler, that follows the true Nietzschean philosophy. And the Kwisatz Haderach they want to engineer? That figure is closer to our pop culture Superman, a literal superhuman with comic book mental and physical powers. And there are other elements that point to this Nietzschean reading of the Bene Gesserit. The Gom Jabbar test, for example, given by the Reverend Mother to Paul, forces the subject to master instinct through sheer will. Failure, giving in to an animal impulse to remove your hand from the box, leads to death. Passing the test requires self-overcoming, a core idea in Nietzsche's philosophy. It echoes his belief that humans must conquer their own limitations to become something greater.
Silence! Silence!
I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. I must not
Feel the flesh.
the mind killer. Crispy. Death brings total obliteration. I will face my
Flesh.
And another example comes from the Bene Gesserit's Missionaria Protectiva, the religious arm of the sisterhood. Nietzsche argued that religion provides meaning for many people, but at the cost of creating a kind of slave morality. This ties directly to the Bene Gesserit's manipulation of prophecy. They plant myths like the legend of the Lisan al-Gaib across the galaxy, not because they believe them, but because other people do. For them, religion is a tool to steer entire populations, and prepare the universe for subjugation by the Kwisatz Haderach, controlled by the Bene Gesserit. But these well-laid plans eventually backfire. They finally succeed in creating their Kwisatz Haderach, but lose control of him. Paul rejects his role, pushing him closer to the real Übermensch concept. A true Nietzschean figure is the one who refuses to be a slave. Paul self-actualizes, masters himself, and becomes something beyond the sisterhood's imagination. I think Herbert is making a point here about the nature of control. The Bene Gesserit try to manufacture transcendence, but true transcendence, in a Nietzschean sense, can't be engineered or owned. It must be seized by the individual. In the end, the Bene Gesserit got a Superman, just not the one they expected. When you step back and look at the character motivations in Dune, you can see what Herbert was doing with the story all along. He wasn't building a universe of heroes and villains. He was building a laboratory of philosophies. From the ancient Stoic ideals to modern Nietzschean self-mastery, Herbert pushes each ideology to its extreme, then watches how it shapes the people who follow it. And the result is clear. Virtue without flexibility leads to ruin. Pleasure without limits leads to decay. Power without morality leads to tyranny. Faith without skepticism leads to fanaticism. And control without humility destroys itself. Dune isn't a story about which philosophy is right. It's about how every philosophy, when taken too far, becomes dangerous. And as Paul rises above all of these systems, Herbert asks one last question. What happens when ideology itself becomes a weapon? If you want to see a video exploring that question, especially Paul's own philosophical identity, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.